Hi, everybody. Today we're going to continue reading A Letter to Heaven, Chapter 5, A Gift from Heaven. I intended to get right back to school as soon as we got settled. I had earned over half the credits I needed to get my cosmetology license, and had thoughts of owning my own small beauty shop someday, or maybe a mobile nail business. I was determined not to let all those hours go to waste. But sometimes, no matter how determined you are, if something is just not meant to be, it won't be. One thing after another prevented me from getting enrolled. First, I had to get my hours transferred. That took over a month. Then I had to check out the schools, find out where I wanted to go. They were all so far away, and actually made it out to interview at one school and was going to enroll there. Just had to wait on my transfer letter. Obviously, fate had other plans for me. My mom got a job managing a small law office which was in desperate need of her direction, and it turned out they were also in desperate need of a skilled paralegal. I had 13 years experience, and Mom offered me the job. So once again I raised my glass to circumstance. She needed me, and we could always use the money. So I got a job that I didn't really want. It was only going to be for a week or so at first, and then a week turned into a month, and a month turned into 6, and before I knew it, that turned into more than a year. Funny how that happens. How time gets away from you. How I hated being confined like that all day, staring at those 4 walls, practically glued to a chair except for the occasional walk to the copy room. I hated the whole routine. The drive in every morning, the drive home every night, day after day dealing with so many other people's problems, as if I didn't have enough of my own. It seemed like life was passing me by as I sat there, dealing with divorce, child support, custody battles, property disputes. Why couldn't everyone just get along? By the time I was finally ready to quit, or rather, by the time I finally convinced everyone else I was ready to quit, I had lost all of my hours from school. Even though I had my hours accredited shortly after the move, I found out a little too late that I would have had to actually re-enroll in school within 1 year of my transfer to keep those hours. It was late September now, 1997. Just over a year. And there was nothing I could do about it, except to start all over. The time and the cost involved just didn't seem worth it. And it wasn't what I really wanted to do for a living anyway, so I decided to let it go. My cosmetology training, it seemed, would have to remain of use for only my family and friends. But it was just as well, you see, because fate had another surprise in store for me. That November, I became very ill. I thought I had been going through early menopause for years now. I'd been feeling out of whack, probably from the devastation of losing Ladon. But whatever the reason, my body just wasn't functioning right, and I was tired all the time, cranky, becoming short-tempered, having a lot of headaches, and generally just feeling like shit. Then I got really sick, throwing up constantly sick. I was very weak and had absolutely no energy. I finally asked a friend to take me to the doctor. I told him my body hadn't been normal for years. He ran all kinds of blood tests to determine what was wrong with me, and much to my surprise, nothing was wrong. Nothing at all. It was all right, in fact. Perfectly right. December 15th, 1997. Hey sis, I can't believe it. After 7 long years, I am pregnant again. I feel your hand in this somehow. Thank you. I thought I would never get pregnant again. I had long given up hope. This is truly a blessing. This bundle of life now growing inside of me, it fills me with such joy, such happiness. Yet at the same time, it scares me a little bit. I'm afraid of losing the baby again. I'm trying not to get too attached, at least until I pass 3 months. Both the others I lost were in the first trimester. And Casey is so excited, I had to warn her that there is a chance that the baby might not make it. So, I guess we're as prepared as we can be. Well, I should go put my feet up. The doctor told me to take it easy. I love you so much. Denny. The baby grew and got stronger each day, and eventually I got over being sick. We had an early sonogram done and found out that the baby was a boy, and even though Casey always thought she wanted a little sister, she was elated seeing the ultrasound, just knowing it was real. She was finally going to be a big sister, and it really didn't matter what sex the baby was. Of course, Sid was tickled since it was his first baby. April 1st, 1998. Dear LaDawn, well, since we found out the baby is a boy, I asked Sid if I could name him Christopher, like I wanted to name Brian almost 15 years ago. Sid said he didn't care what I name him as long as his middle name is Thomas. So that's it. Christopher Thomas Tyon. We found out that he has the same condition Cody had when he was born, craniosynostosis. It was apparent from the sonogram that the sagittal suture line in his skull is in fact already fused, so he has no soft spot. And that means surgery for this baby as well. Sometimes I have to question why God does these things to me. So he gets a kick out of testing me, throwing stumbling blocks in my way just to watch me try to overcome them. But then I guess that's what he does to everyone. I'm not any more or less special. It's just my particular set of circumstances that sets me apart from the rest. I woke up this morning remembering that today was your wedding anniversary. 9 years ago today, I stood by your side as you and Felix said your vows. You were so beautiful as you walked around the pool and through the archway, which we had decorated all in purple flowers. Brian was in a purple shirt, and Cody just a baby in a little purple jacket. You were the only one in white. Wow. Time really does go by too fast. Now here I sit, pregnant with my 4th child, wondering if he was meant to be yours. I promise I'll take really good care of him. You know how much I wanted another child. I love you. Thanks for putting in a good word for me. Forever, Danelle. He wanted to wait. But on July 1st, 1998, at 7 a.m., my doctor induced labor, and at 6:46 p.m., Christopher Thomas Tyon came into this world, and boy was he mad. Sure enough, it was obvious. His skull was as solid as it could be. He had a very long head with a visible ridge from front to back, but he was absolutely beautiful to me. Casey was so proud to finally be a big sister. She was with me through the entire labor and birth. She said it was the neatest experience of her whole life, which at 7 seems like an eternity. The birth of a new life is a beautiful thing to witness. You just have to get past the physical side of it, the blood and the view, and accept it for what it is. Nothing short of a miracle. This little tiny being comes to life right before your eyes. As they cut the cord and it begins breathing on its own, you can't help but feel blessed just to be there. It was really wonderful being able to share it with her, and I was glad that she wanted to be a part of it. She was relieved to know that it could all be done with no pain medication whatsoever. It really didn't seem to take that long. Only the last couple of hours were difficult. Sid was funny because he was so excited. He was nervous, afraid he wouldn't know what to do when the time came. He kept me smiling the whole time, and that's all he really needed to do, because I knew that everything else would take care of itself. When the baby was ready, it would come. It just happens that way. As with all things in life, nature takes its course, and we just have to follow its lead. If we bear the pain through the hard times and do our fair share of the labor, staying focused and strong and trusting that everything happens for the best, we will reap the rewards of our hard work and be blessed to experience the joy of love and gain knowledge from life's many lessons. No matter how many times I do it, giving birth always amazes me. And it had been so long since I'd held a tiny little newborn, I had almost forgotten how good it felt. I held him endlessly at first, never wanting to let him go. He would lay on my chest so comfortably that I found myself allowing him to just fall asleep there, and most of the times we would sleep the whole night that way. Every one of my children have been such blessings in my life, but this one, he was extra special, and I knew it right from the start. Chapter 6. Just another bump in the road. In August of 1998, just 1 month and a few days after Christopher's birth, Brian, my then 15-year-old, fell and broke his hip, rollerblading, jumping a 5-foot ramp. Well, landing, actually. He snapped his whole thigh bone right off of the ball joint. The doctor said it was an injury like that seen in an 80-year-old man. He had to have it put back together with 2 steel pins. When Brian first came out of the surgery, he was medicated constantly, but he was in immense pain, so it was best that he slept through most of it. The second day in the hospital was the hardest, because after he started coming out of the medication, the reality of what he had actually done finally hit him. He realized that the entire course of his life had just been changed. The doctor told us that he would probably never be able to skate again or do anything that would risk injuring the hip. He gave Brian less than a 50% chance that the ball joint would even survive this injury, but said we wouldn't know for sure for 2 years. So his dreams of becoming a freestyle skating champion would have to remain just that. Only dreams. We had a couple of peaceful months with lots of time for Brian to reflect upon where his life was now headed. He was in a wheelchair for several weeks, and on crutches for 2 months after that. He spent the first semester of high school on homebound teaching with me, and then, just when he got back on his feet again and started back to school, we hit another bump in the road. It was Friday, November 13th. I will never forget that day either. Brian came home not feeling well, stomach pains again. He had suffered for the past 3 years with constant pains in his stomach that no one could seem to diagnose. But this time, it was much worse. He said he had been jumping around in the mud puddles after school and thought maybe he had just overdone it. He was soaking wet when he came in, so I had him change clothes and built a fire in the fireplace for him. He laid down in front of it with blankets on and went to sleep. Later that night, he started heaving over and over, and he was burning up with a fever. I tried to take him to the doctor right then, but he refused. He kept insisting that he would be okay. Finally, at 10 p.m., he told me that he wanted to go. We took him to the hospital, and though they still weren't sure, they said everything was pointing to a burst appendix. So they took him into emergency surgery just minutes after midnight. November 14th. 1998. Dear LaDawn, I came so close to losing Brian last night. Those moments where we weren't sure whether he was going to make it or not were the worst. The surgeon said that when he opened him up, his appendix was floating in a sea of pus, and that Brian would not have made it through the night. For a while it felt like I was reliving the events of your death, and that made it seem all the more real. Knowing how fast it can happen, how quickly things can change, I was actually prepared for the worst. Remember when Brian was in the hospital 3 years ago for this very thing? We spent the night in the hospital, and half an hour before the surgery, they ran another test and said everything was back to normal, so they sent us home. I cursed them for that then, and I still do. Brian should not have had to suffer all those years when it could have been taken care of so long ago. The doctors believe he will be all right now, although he has an awful open wound right down the middle of his belly. They said he was so infected that they couldn't stitch him up, so it has to heal as it is. We will have to change the bandage twice a day for 3 weeks after we get him home. Looks like we will be commuting between hospitals for the last few days of Brian's stay. Christopher's surgery is scheduled for November 19th. Keep an eye on him for me, all right? I love you. Always. Denny. Since it was the second time I'd been through this surgery, I wasn't too worried. Though it's never easy letting your child go when you know someone's going to be cutting into them, but sometimes you just don't have a choice. Christopher needed the surgery. He probably would not have survived long without it. His skull had prematurely fused in the womb, so it would not allow for brain growth. That's all there was to it. We were told it was a fluke of nature when it happened to Cody, but in the past 11 years they discovered that it was a genetic condition, and each child of mine had a 50-50 chance of this occurrence. Sid and I both cried as they carried him away to the operating room. So tiny and helpless, so fragile. It would be a heart-wrenching 3 hours before the surgeon came to tell us that all went well. They called us up to the waiting room a couple of times to let us know how things were going during the surgery, but we didn't feel better until it was all over. The surgery had been refined quite a bit since 1987. Cody's surgeon simply removed a 2-by-4-inch rectangle from the top of his skull, sent him home, and told us not to drop him on his head. Christopher's surgeon cut out a pie-shaped piece off the top, cut the back into 1-inch strips, completely reshaped his head, and pieced it back together again. Other than the stitches and the swelling, his head looked almost perfectly normal immediately after surgery. It was really amazing. He was in quite a bit of pain for the first few days, though, and we felt so guilty, just wondering what he must have been thinking. The last he remembered, we were handing him off to some strangers, and then he woke up feeling like this. He was probably really mad at us. His face was so swollen that he couldn't open his eyes, and his skin had a slight greenish purple tone. We spent 5 days in that hospital. I slept in the bed with him, and they fed me because I was nursing. Needless to say, I hope I don't have to see another hospital for a very long time. But I do thank God every day for the surgeons, doctors, and nurses who cared for both of my children during this time. I was so happy to finally have all of my kids healthy and home again. And that takes us to chapter 7. So for this week, I'm going to go ahead and end here. I hate to do too many long videos. If you, want to keep watching, just wait for the next one. I thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. Again, A Letter to Heaven. This is the manuscript. It's available as an ebook on Amazon.com/Kindle. But keep coming back. I'll be reading the whole thing. Thank you. God bless. Have a good week.